Welcome to A Dram of Outlander. This is Desiree, your podcaster and the writer for adramofOutlander.com. For all things Outlander, from the Diana Gabaldon book series to the Stars TV series and everything in between. This is episode 76, The Scottish Prisoner, week 8, chapters 15 and 16. So this week we have been treated from tweets and some pictures from Lynette Rice of Entertainment Weekly. She's been spending time in Cape Town, South Africa on Outlander set. I hope this means that we will be getting interviews and behind the scene pictures and videos, etc. in the weeks and months to come. It is very exciting and I can't wait to see what comes out of it. Let's dive into Chapter 15, The Return of Tobias Quinn. Jaime, John, and Tom Byrd are sailing from England to Ireland. Now we know Jaime doesn't do well aboard ships or boats. And Tom Byrd is most worried about Jaime's demeanor. Gray notices Jaime looking like a horse readying to bolt. John hurriedly goes over to Jaime. He puts his hand on his sleeve, telling Jaime to come. It's all right. Jaime doubts it and says so. He walks out from under John's touch without even noticing it. The good news in this, and John is grateful for it, is that Tom seems to have lost his fear of Jaime. Jaime is reduced to a heap of utter, undignified misery in his seasickness. John recalls Jaime once telling him he was prone to mal de mer, but he had no idea it was this severe. Tom hadn't seen anyone so seasick since Uncle Morris. John assures him no one has ever died of seasickness by itself. And he notes the sea is rough. It's raining. The boat was hurling sickeningly side to side. And smugly, John was thinking about what a good sailor he is. But even he might succumb to mal de mer if he thought about it too much. Tom wishes he had known of Jaime's propensity toward seasickness. He would have brought pickles with dill for Jaime. His gran says it works. And he looks at John as if he'd committed a serious act of negligence in not having pickles on hand. Gray was falling into an utter trance, watching the ocean rise and fall. And he starts to comment to Tom when he's interrupted by an Irishman asking if the big, sick dog downstairs is his friend. John turns to the man, and he notices he's a bit taller than him and terribly thin. He thinks this man's a good sailor with sparkling eyes and spray-soaked curls. Gray says he is Jaime's friend and moves to go past him. The Irishman grabs his arm and presents a bottle of medicine from his cloak. I only wondered, would you maybe accept a bit of medicine for him? I offered it to him myself, only he was too gone for to answer. I thank you, sir. Gray accepts the bottle. What is it, if you please? Mostly bad whiskey, with the ginger root and a little spoon of powdered opium stirred into it as well. Works wonders, it does, but do shake it first. Tom doesn't think they have absolutely anything to lose in this, and looking around as the other passengers had made their way to the deck, due to the insalubrious or unhealthy conditions below, many were vomiting over the railing, and some stared at John as if it were his fault because Jaime was violently ill below. So Jaime is so sick that other passengers scrabbled to deck to vomit because of how he was feeling. If we don't do something about him prompt like, one of that lot's going to knock him on the head and us, said Tom. Jaime hears footsteps and hopes someone was coming to shoot him. He heard whispers but couldn't consent due to lack of strength. He sees it's Tobias Quinn, and he curls himself into a tighter ball. Jaime tells him to go away right before vomiting again. There was even a pool of it forming around him. Poor thing. Quinn tells Jaime he has a draft for him that will help. Just the mere thought of swallowing anything causes Jaime's gorge to rise again. Jaime is crippled with seasickness. It won't stop for him, and he's in agonizing pain and misery. He was annoyed they wouldn't let him die in peace, since they clearly weren't going to kill him. He should have been alarmed by Quinn's unceremonious presence, but he barely noticed it. John's hand was on his shoulder. Jaime wanted to tell him to take it off him. All he could think was, kill you, take your hand, kill you. Instead of the words he meant to say, he uttered blasphemy when he opened his mouth. A woman was near. Dear bleeding heart o' Mary, the poor man's spitting blood. And now all Jaime could do was curl up into an even smaller ball. He heard himself whimpering and bit the inside of his mouth hard to stop it. To be at the mercy of others, to have no control over his body, to be in that place of fragility, the vulnerability where he can't hide it, that must have been terrifying for Jaime and scary. The peanut gallery was urging him to take the draft. He smelled it. Opium, he thought. He remembered the time in France he had taken it. The dreams were a terrible mix of lust and nightmare. He raved out loud in his dreams, too. And when he'd fought Blackjack Randall in Fire and Shadow, Claire, that had been opium, too. So his opium experience has not been pleasant. There was a sudden violent shift of the boat, and it hurled everyone askew, including Jaime, who was thrown off the bench onto the floor and into people. He ended up squishing John. Bloody, get off me. John arose quickly, cracking his head, then discommoding the chickens whose crate he leaned upon. They shrieked, feathers flew, and they shat. Jaime was slowly melting onto the floor, and he didn't care. Others tried to haul him up. Christ, he's a heavy motherfucker. Gray told him to open his mouth. They forced him to swallow the nasty liquid. He opened his eyes for a moment to see Quinn staring at him concerned. Jaime knows he cannot speak of Quinn or ramble in his drugged sleep. So to fix this, he grabs the bottle from John and drains the entire thing. Sometime later, when Jaime woke up, he actually felt pretty decent. He was in a bed that wasn't moving, but he didn't know who he was or where. He was muddled in the mind and closed his eyes again. He thought he was seeing a mermaid with 3 breasts. Will you be having a pot of coffee, sir? Does one of the other ones squirt whiskey? She gasps. He refocuses his vision, and it's just a girl pouring coffee. No teats. No hope of cream, then, I suppose? 2 English voices said to leave him to them and leave the coffee. Jaime is still hallucinating, and he sees a small fish go down between her breasts. What a lucky fish. John and Tom discuss what to do with him. Tom thinks pouring cold water down his neck might work. John thinks that's a great idea and Tom should do it. But Tom doesn't want to do it. I'm sure he isn't violent, Tom. Tom wants absolutely none of it. Just as you say, me lord. But he might turn nasty, mightn't he? Gentlemen do sometimes after a hard night. I trust you do not speak from personal experience, Tom. Certainly not, me lord. John says opium doesn't do that, but it does give awful dreams. Tom moves closer with a sponge in his hand, wondering if Jaime is still asleep. He's very close, and Jaime opens his eyes. Tom squeals and drops the sponge onto Jaime's chest. Jaime takes it and drops it on the floor. John greets him, asking if he is better. Jaime sits up and puts his feet squarely on the floor. He feels odd, but not badly. He has his hand out for Tom to put the coffee cup into it like a flag of truce. Jaime sits holding the coffee, working to regain a sense of normalcy and clear-headedness. After a sip of coffee, "We're in Ireland then, are we?" John says they are and starts to ask Jaime if he's always like this. Jaime interrupts him and says yes. "Jesus, rather fortunate that you were not transported after Culloden then. I doubt you would have survived the voyage." "Oh, John, you have no idea." Jaime looks at John with narrowed eyes, thinking it was John who'd intervened and kept him from being transported. But he notices that John looks as if he meant nothing except what was obvious. Quinn knocks on the door and pokes his head in. Jaime had completely forgotten about Quinn. He says he came to check on Jaime's recovery. John asks if Quinn wants coffee and has Tom order up breakfast. "It's pleased I am to see you so far recovered, sir. Perhaps this will aid in your complete return to the land of the living," as he pours a healthy portion of whiskey into Jaime's coffee. Jaime's addled brain was totally chaos, but the whiskey sounded good just now. "Morin tang," he says. Quinn casually speaks to John would they need a coach or horses. It's about 2 days' ride to Athlone with good weather on horse, and it's a bit longer by coach. Jaime says he can ride and finds himself to be seriously hungry. So they decide that John and Jaime will ride while Tom will go by coach with all the luggage. Quinn then invites himself along to ride with John and Jaime as it's the direction he's needing to go. Jaime is obviously unhappy about this and suggests that Quinn finds his own path. In fact, Jaime really wants to drop Quinn out of the window and doesn't want him interfering with what needed to be done. He would meet them in the courtyard in any event, says Quinn. Quinn leaves the room but then pops his head back in, telling them where to secure horses. John was pleased with Quinn's referral. The horses were sound, and Quinn had even showed up to bargain a good price. He's ingratiating himself. And John is thinking it's a public road anyway, and there is no way to keep Quinn from riding with them. As the three rode, there was the normal small talk. Quinn had business to attend to in County Roscommon, and John asks if he knows Siverley, since he is from the same area. Quinn knows the name and estate, but said Siverley wouldn't know the likes of him, and John asked what trade Quinn is in. Evading the answer, he said this and that, but primarily he's a printer. Of sermons and philosophical works. That sounds a lot like what Jaime did in Edinburgh, more like seditious materials with a few sermons and philosophical works thrown in. Jaime must have made a sound because John asked him if he said something. I swallowed a gnat. Jaime, always using humor. The chatting ceased as they rode on. John is dwelling in thoughts of meeting Siverley. And that's assuming Siverley hadn't left for a different country altogether. He remembers his brief encounter with Siverley in Quebec, and how Siverley had saved his life. Yeah, it might be a bit awkward, but John has no worries over what he is to do. If Siverley was innocent after all, he should be happy to go back to England to clear his name. And John might just take that tack with him, assuming innocence over it all when he met with him. If that didn't work, is there anything he could do to compel or threaten him with? Well, yes. He could point out that Siverley risked expulsion from his regiment if the charges went unanswered, to say nothing of expulsion from his clubs, if he belonged to any, and from society in general. Hal made a decent threat himself. Gray could suggest with complete truth that his brother, the Duke, was upset by the seriousness of the charges and might bring a question in the House of Lords. But being a reasonable man, he grinned to himself at that, would certainly be willing to meet with Major Siverley. Gray might delicately suggest that in that case a court-martial might be avoided. John thinks his plan is an okay plan, and if none of that worked, he would go to the Justiciar of Athlone Castle. That's the highest authority locally, and appeal to him. He might be able to convince him to arrest Siverley and then place him into John's hands to be taken back to England. And if that failed, then Jaime could muscle the man, certainly. John now allowed his mind to relax and enjoy the fresh air. He could hear Jaime asking Quinn about the sermons he printed. John, not interested in such things, sped up and left them to the conversation. Oh, what a clever wee laddie Jaime is. Now he could speak to Quinn without John being in hearing distance. Now what the devil is Quinn really up to? Why is he staying so close to them? Chapter 16. Tower House. They slept rough. They were in an abandoned tower house. It was a ruins. It was quiet and off the road. It was at Quinn's suggestion. There was a well nearby, too. Jaime drew water from it, filling his canteen. It smelled safe to him. No animals had died in it recently. He and Quinn said a prayer over it before drinking. This surprised John. The words they spoke were in each their own Gaelic, but their rhythm was similar. John wasn't sure what the prayer was, but he reverently waited until they were finished. The horses were hobbled so they could graze in the grass nearby, and the trio of Quinn, Jaime, and John ate apples, cheese, and bread. Tired, they settled into sleep not long after their quiet dinner. John, being a trained soldier, fell asleep quickly, but then he awoke heart-pounding, hand on his dagger. He heard a rustling in the grass outside, and as he readied to get on his feet, he heard a Scottish whisper before he could move. "Are you mad? Drop it, or I'll break your arm." There was a startled huff of air and the faint thump of something hitting the ground. Gray lay frozen, waiting. "Hush, man. You don't want to wake him?" "Oh, that I do, if you were doing what I think you were." "Not here. Come away, for God's sake." Gray quietly got up with his pistol in hand. He followed behind them, unseen. Quinn and Jaime went behind the tower, and John listened. "Now then, what the devil do you mean by this?" "We don't need him." "You don't need him, Mahara." "There are a good many folk in the world I don't need, including you, you wee gomerel. If I thought it right to kill them on that account, I'd have done away with you before we left London." Gray blinked at what he was hearing, thoughts swirling. He was putting two and two together. Quinn had been in touch with Jaime in London. What was Jaime's part? Why had Jaime not told Gray? Bile rose, and he swallowed it. "If he's dead, you could disappear, MacDoo. Nothing easier. You're safe out of England now, and more than one place in Ireland where you could lie hidden for a bit. Or you could go across to France, should you feel the need. But who would hunt you?" Jaime explains to him that Hal would hunt after him if John were killed and he disappeared. "Did it never occur to you to ask if I thought it was a good idea to kill the Englishman?" Quinn thinks this is amusing, and Jaime scolds him for calling him MacDoo. Quinn says Jaime certainly has a tender conscience, but he would have taken care of it if for another minute. Jaime asks if Quinn would have lied to him about it or told him the truth. Quinn says he would have told him afterward what he'd done. Then Quinn demands what Jaime owes Gray or Pardlow. They enslaved him, killed his kin and comrades, took his land. "After saving my life," Jaime interrupts. He wasn't worried Quinn could talk Jaime into anything. But John wondered, would Jaime talk Quinn out of anything either? He certainly didn't savor the idea of many sleepless nights waiting to be murdered. And then Jaime has some additional words. "Look ya," he said in a low, firm voice. "I've given my word in this. If you dare to dishonor me by killing the Englishman, I tell you flat, Quinn, it'll be you joining him at the bottom of a well." John knows that here and there, in the time they've known each other, that Jaime has indeed wanted him dead. But right now, for dishonor or hell, he was relieved he did not. Quinn does acquiesce to Jaime. John creeps closer to hear after the wind had changed direction. Quinn says John is interfering in their business, while Jaime declares they have no business. Quinn is not backing down easily. It's the business of every man, every true Catholic. Jaime tells Quinn to go on his way. He's not going to hinder him, but he has business of his own to see to, and Quinn will not stand in his way. And then Jaime says, "I chava," which means good night, and he leaves. And John hides the best he can in case Jaime comes across where he's standing. John was wildly thinking, and he was worried that Jaime could smell him like an animal that's fearful, and that Jaime would come and hunt him. But then Jaime changes course, going into the tower, and he hears him splashing water on his face. He thinks to calm himself. John goes back to their sleeping place in case either man went to look for him. As he nears his crumpled cloak on the ground, he realizes he is still holding the pistol. He had been gripping it so hard the gun handle had imprinted onto his hand. He was unable to sleep, his thoughts too disturbed. He remembers Jaime had tried to stop Quinn from accompanying them on their ride, and it was Gray himself who insisted he come along. Jaime was not involved with Quinn, John thought. But Jaime knows what Quinn is up to, and he hadn't told him. He wanted to know what the business was. He decided they were clues, as in the reference to true Catholics. It smelled of Jacobites. He had heard nothing active from the Jacobite cause for a year or two. Then he remembers Thomas Lally and that verse Minnie pointed out that she said meant white rose. Neither Fraser or Lally had mentioned it. What had Jaime and Lally said to each other when speaking their native tongues? He wonders if the Jacobites would ever give up. He was annoyed Jaime had met Quinn in London after Hal allowed him to walk freely. Serve you right if the Irish blackguard had cut my throat, he thinks to Hal. More importantly, Jaime didn't want him dead and had stopped Quinn from killing him. This looks familiar. This reminds me of Jaime going through all the puzzle pieces when he was sitting on the upturned stool that he was using as a footstool space before he opened his eyes to see John in the last chapter prior. Or in the last week's podcast, I should say. John goes through and he's doing that same processing, just pulling those thoughts out, thinking whatever needs to be thought to come down to some sort of answer, to have a clear vision in his head of what is and what he might need to do. John and Jaime are very much alike, probably more alike than either would say. John has two choices: say nothing about it or talk to Fraser. And he knows he has to sleep. He can't go on this way before meeting Siverly. Quinn wants Jaime involved in whatever the plan is, but Jaime did not. And now he notices the sky changing, and he heard the others waking. And he thinks if Quinn suspected anything, he would kill him no matter what Jaime said, and he's probably right. How did Quinn know Jaime anyway? But Quinn did know Jaime. He used McDo, like the Ardsmuir prisoners did. And we know it means son of a black one. And John wonders, is this a satanic reference? Doubtful. About Jaime's character? And then he wonders what Jaime's father looked like. Bingo, John! Black Brian. The horses were under the tower wall drowsing. Then one of them farted. The birds chirped, and the morning was here. He decides he needs to talk to Jaime. He would be direct. So he comes up to Jaime and Quinn and asks Quinn to go ahead so he could discuss his business with Jaime. Slightly startled, he looks at Jaime, whose face said this was normal. Quinn agrees, and John smiles at him, and Quinn simply looked taken aback. This was not what he was expecting. So Jaime makes a breakfast of grilled cheese to be eaten with apples. And John thinks it's tasty, being the first time he'd ever eaten it. And while I was typing this up, I was eating a Gouda and apple grilled cheese sandwich. Oh, the coincidence. It was quite delicious as well. After Quinn rode away and was far enough, John tells Jaime he awoke in the night. Does Quinn know their business with Syverley? Jaime says probably not. If he does, he didn't hear it from him. John wants to know where else he could have heard it from. Hal's servants, Jaime says. That's how Quinn found out they were going to Ireland, in fact. John thinks that could be true because he'd sent Tom Byrd to gather information from other servants a time or two. How is Quinn in London? Jaime explained he'd followed him from Hillwater when Hal had him retrieved. Jaime tells John he'll need to ask Quinn himself how he came to Hillwater if he really wants to know. They made their way to the horses and back to the road. It was a beautiful morning with the proper sights and sounds. They rode side by side for 15 minutes before Gray spoke again. John wants to know if Jaime will swear that what Quinn is up to doesn't threaten either their job in regard to Major Syverley or the safety of England. Jaime just says no. This shocks Gray because of the bluntness. He wants to know what it is, or is it both? Jaime simply says, Quinn's affairs are his own, Colonel. If he has secrets, they are not mine to share. This makes Gray laugh and thinks it's a nice turn of phrase. So, is Jaime saying he's ignorant of what Quinn is up to? Or that he knows, but his honor will not allow him to tell Gray? Take your choice. Now, Gray crosses the line a bit here. After riding in silence, Gray reminds Jaime that action or inaction in assisting the king's enemy is still treason. It is not frivolous to point out that I am a convicted traitor. Are there judicial degrees of that crime? Is it additive? Because when they tried me, all they said was treason before putting a rope around my neck. John says Jaime wasn't sentenced to hang, but some were or transported. But it is possible. Jaime's color rises. He tells John of being marched from Inverness to Ardsmuir with ropes around their necks. It showed how forfeit their lives were, and only by generosity were they alive. Jaime has to shake his head hard by the generosity of the king. Jaime kicks his horse, going into a trot. Gray rides for a bit, thinking, before catching up to Jaime. He thanks him for not allowing Quinn to kill him. And Jaime says, "You're welcome." Can he expect this courtesy to continue? He can. And they see Quinn up ahead a quarter mile. As they were about to reach Quinn, Jaime spoke. "You'll do what you have to do, Colonel, and so shall I." I find it interesting and terrible how John pulls the authority card yet again. This further shows the disparity between them. Until Jaime is truly free, they cannot be equals. Jaime is a subordinate, and Gray treats him so, even if only obviously on occasion. This is what he really believes. Jaime isn't equal. When push comes to shove, John puts it in his face and shows him. Grey harbors many biases toward the Scots, whether conscious or not. And he might because of his loyalty to the crown or his upbringing. Just like we talked about in the last podcast, their relationship, their friendship can never be on even par. John has been in a position of authority for the last many years. He holds his parole, for goodness sake. And though John knows what status Jaime really has, what his education is, what his training is, that he's a gentleman, he's also still a paroled prisoner. He's still a traitor. He's still less than, and he's a Scot, which makes him not an Englishman. It's very complicated. And I love how Jaime refuses to ever act like a subordinate. His pride, his showing his true station. It doesn't matter if he has dirt on his feet or on his clothes and he's in rags. He refuses to be less. He is the King of Men. He does have stature. He does have a presence. He has education. And even though this oppression of this prison, of being imprisoned and being paroled and being less than, and to be so put down for all these years, he still rises. Because Jaime is the King of Men, isn't he? And that's one of the reasons we love him. So, where do you find A Dram of Outlander? Facebook, A Dram of Outlander page, or you can join the private group, A Dram of Outlander, that you have to ask to join on Facebook. Dram of Outlander on Instagram and Twitter. Of course, adramofoutlander.com. And how do you support the podcast? Well, that's simple. Listen to it, share it with others, tell other people about it, share it on your social media sites, interact with other people on the page and on Twitter and Instagram. You can also email me questions and comments and thoughts at adramofoutlander@gmail.com. And you can call into the listener line, 719-425-9444. Come on over to the Twitter chat on Wednesday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern. 6 p.m. Pacific time, 9 p.m. Eastern time. Use the hashtag ADOO. And of course, you can send a financial contribution either through patreon.com/adramofoutlander, or you can contact me directly if you want to send a one-time support check. And I want to give a shout out to Jan, who did send me a little bit of financial love to help support the podcast. And I appreciate you more than you know. That will pay for a couple months of podcast upkeep. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. And I do love to hear from you, and I want to hear your thoughts, because I'm not somebody who is a literary mastermind. I'm a longtime fan who's read these books over and over. I have a desire to share my thoughts with you, and so many of you come along and listen every single week, and I'm grateful to you, and I want to hear your voice as well. The things that you all come up with, oh, amazing, super brainy, fantastic thoughts. And I love hearing it, so keep it coming. Next week, for week 9, we are covering chapters 17 and 18. We're just going to keep on until we finish up, which should be sometime into June. I am trying to help y'all out with this Droughtlander between season 2 and season 3. We're going to keep on it together, make it less painful. Have a fantastic week. And until next time, slán je va.